Joining us now for more on this is Scott Reid, our CTV News political commentator. Scott, okay, so it sounds like Chrystia Freeland's kind of repeating what we heard earlier. She was saying that, this wouldn't be beneficial for anyone if Alberta were to pull out of the Canada Pension Plan. What would happen if they did?
Well, clearly there would be significant harm to everyone involved. I mean, there were things that happened in Minister Freeland's press conference and announcements from the government that I expected and things that surprised me, to be honest. So I expected that the minister would maintain a hard line, the federal minister, saying that any effort to dismantle or depart from the CPP would be harmful for Albertans, would be harmful for the rest of the country. It's a notoriously bad idea. It's a notoriously unpopular idea, even in Alberta. There's this preposterous notion that Alberta, with say a dozen% of the population, would be entitled to 53% of the entire CPP fund. So there's a pretty clear consensus across the country from all finance ministers. And I wasn't surprised to hear that. What I was surprised to hear is that, the federal minister of finance said that they'll ask the chief actuary officer to provide what might be a quarreling, a contesting transfer amount if Alberta were to leave. You heard the minister talk about a number of the elements that would need to be negotiated. The reason I'm surprised by that is I expected the government to maintain the onus on Alberta, to not offer up its own numbers, to not provide a roadmap for anyone to depart from the CPP. And so I was a little bit surprised to hear the minister talk that way. I would have thought that she and the other provincial governments would have wanted to keep all the pressure on Alberta to defend this preposterous notion and how it serves either the interests of Alberta or Canada.
Don't you think, though, that by Chrystia Freeland going ahead and suggesting that this is a path forward here in terms of the steps towards continuing on this discussion, that provides a bit of accountability, though, in terms of where Alberta got its numbers? These are your numbers, but these are ours.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's two schools of thought how to handle this. One is, all right, let's provide them with a countervailing set of numbers. If it's not 53%, then what is it? Is it 16%? Is it 21%? Is it 9%? So they're going to provide that number now. I guess from my perspective, and you also heard her talking about the issues of mobility and how you would need to negotiate agreements with all other provinces. She talked about what the precedents for that are, both nationally and provincially. I guess, what I think many people would say is that if you're in a negotiation, if you're in a discussion, Alberta is the one that's proposed this idea. Alberta is the one that's put it on the table. Right now, the onus is on Alberta to defend that number, as gobsmacking large and preposterous as it is. Why provide Alberta with a wall to bounce its ball off of? Why say, actually, the number is this? And then it can say, well, see, this number is only 11%, and we're the aggrieved party. Or you end up in a new battle with other provinces when they say, well, actually, so even the chief actuary says their number should be 21%. What about us in Ontario? What about those of us in BC? I just don't know that it makes sense at this early stage to lay any architecture out whatsoever that normalizes the idea of busting up the CPP and departing. Certainly Canadians don't want anything to do with it. They don't want a single percent of that idea.
Scott, I wonder if I could ask you about what the Canadian Federation of Independent Business was saying. They were encouraging the federal government to work with the provinces and territories to make sure that all Canadians get the facts on what the implications of a move like this would be. And they were suggesting that, that the federal government needs to do this in order to ensure that changes to the CPP aren't done perhaps in protest of other policies, like the carbon tax. What do you think about that?
I don't think much of it. I think certainly in terms of the political discussion that's taking place right now, the recent move on the carbon tax has complicated the discussion around the CPP because, you've got governments raising it and they're saying, well, gee, yes, I think Alberta is completely on the wrong foot here, but gee, federal government, you're not making it any easier by apparently pursuing an uneven policy with respect to the application of a carbon tax. But in terms of the CFIB saying that the onus ought to be on the federal government to clearly establish a set rules and a roadmap for us to dismantle something that has served every Canadian well since the 1960s. I just think that's a bad idea. And I really think, frankly, it's the CFIB trying to sort of have it on the one hand, on the other hand, say, well, this is a reasonable position, but then it allows them to relieve their pressure, not looking like they're on the wrong side of the Alberta government. This idea is bad. It's as bad as New Coke. It should be called out as such. It should be universally called out as such.
I guess no one really liked New Coke, Scott Reid, our new CTV News political commentator. Other people like different versions of it, but I guess you're right. Thanks so much, as always.
Thanks, Lois.